Hello and welcome to a special episode of Teaching Liberty Live. The legislative session has closed, and I've been covering some of the actions: what got passed, what got killed, who campaigned on one thing, voted another way, and one issue I've covered quite extensively is housing. So I have here with me Joe Delong from CCM, which is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. And we had a slew of housing legislation that passed or is sitting on Lamont's desk, and much of it is aimed at the so-called housing crisis here in Connecticut. And today we're going to focus on perhaps one of the most hotly debated aspects, which is fair share housing. And fair share housing is actually an import from New Jersey, and it's been around for several legislative sessions. It's being pushed by Democratic House Majority Leader Jason Rojas. And this year, the bill was House Bill 6633. It lost steam Friday night, which is last week, just less than a week ago, on the last day of the legislative session. Friday morning, Jason Rojas announces, I don't have the votes to get this through. And then, pushing on midnight, suddenly, mysteriously, the language ends up in Senate Bill 998. It's no secret that I've been a supporter of grassroots group CT169, trying to follow along, founded by Maria and Alexis. They are out here to advocate for local control, advocating the environment. We have a beautiful state here. We want to promote home ownership. But with fair share finding its way into SB 998, they've been questioning how it got there, who was involved, and one of those people is Joe Delong. So I appreciate you, Joe, for coming in here today. Before we get started, I just want to ask that everybody likes this video. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any lives like this. And of course, share this out. This is so important for the people of Connecticut to get involved in this conversation and get used to asking these questions and understanding the process. So thank you so much, Joe, for coming on the show. I just wanted to really quick, for people who don't know, CCM is the largest nonpartisan organization of municipal leaders representing towns and cities from all corners of the state, 169 of 168 of the municipalities. And so I'm wondering, what is CCM's stance on fair share? Do you think it's good for Connecticut? Why or why not?
No, I think I think fair share is terrible legislation. Legislation that our membership pretty much universally opposes. I believe will continue to oppose. And the whys. I think part of it is one of the things, Stephanie, if you don't mind me just taking a step back,
Yeah.
is to talk about how we develop our positions, why we advocate in the way that we advocate. There's a misnomer sometimes that our positions come from me as the CEO or are staff driven. We have a very defined process that engages the mayors, first selectmen, town managers, municipal CEOs from all over the state in developing our legislative advocacy platform. One of the committees that we have within that process, because we're involved in so many different areas, one of the committees that we have is a land use policy committee. So the land use committee will study all of these different avenues, these different policies, different ways to address land use or support zoning or override zoning or all of these different proposals that are out there. And then they will present their platform actually to our full meeting of our membership all across the state at our conference, which is either held in October or November of every year. And then our full membership ultimately votes on that platform and then goes a step further within the platform, because there's so many bills we take positions on. Then they go a step further and they vote on what are the priority bills within our platform. So here are our positions on all these issues, but driven by the membership vote, here are the top issues that we want the advocacy folks to really focus on the hardest. And
so
I will
you're
tell
telling
you that from the very get-go, stopping the mandate portion of fair share. And that's really what it's all about. In the end, it's not about studies, it's not about suggestions, it's about the mandate, putting the mandate on the towns and cities that says you have to do this. Our membership, I think, really across the board was adamantly opposed to that legislation going anywhere.
Okay, so you guys are opposed to the fair share legislation going through. The majority, you're saying, of your members, 168 municipalities, and yet it did go through. The language is now in Bill 998, which is waiting for Lamont's signature. And it's fair to say, right? Like, you've been here since 2015, deeply involved in the legislative process. You understand the movers and the shakers up there. And you, when I say you, of course, I'm talking about CCM more generally, your representatives, the lobbyists you have out there. So what happened? How did this happen?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion about this, about what actually did happen. So again, taking a step back, the actual fair share bill that would have put the mandate on towns and cities. Um, that's the bill that Jason Rojas couldn't get the votes for. That's the bill that ultimately died. The one creating the mandate. I will tell you, there were about because we working in that building, we're very close to this. There were about 30 Democrats in the House. And I think this is also an important distinction to point out. The fight on this bill is in the House. Anybody who's close to this issue and knows it will know the fight is not in the Senate. The Senate has a very limited amount of Republicans, 12 Republicans, kind of a supermajority of the Democrats. And I think it's pretty fair to say that with very little debate, the Democrats would, in the Senate, would support fair share, regardless of what you did to try to convince them otherwise. The debate was in the House. That was the place where we had the opportunity to really push back. And fortunately, we had about 30 House Democrats who were willing to stand with the Republicans to vote no on a fair share mandate bill. The leadership and Majority Leader Rojas, in order to get enough votes, he needed to turn 8 of those 30. It was about an 8-vote swing was what it was. So if they pull 8 of the 30, they now have the votes to get it done. Our job is to hold and not let them swing 8 of those 30. And ultimately, we were successful in doing that. What ended up happening was after that, after the main portion of this bill died, the mandate portion died, the one that would have been so onerous and so costly to towns and cities, they took a provision, a small provision of that bill that was still the fair share, but it wasn't the mandate. And they slipped it into another bill to say to the Office of Policy and Management, OPM, that we're asking you, it's essentially a study, but they don't use the term study. We're asking you to develop the fair share methodology and to point out what the fair share would be for every town if this were implemented. Now, let me break this down into
Okay,
a few
so
different
first of all,
parts.
I do want to just push back on one thing. You say that there wasn't much debate, but there was 9 hours of debate, right? So this was pretty hotly debated even within the Senate,
In the Senate.
though previously
Com-
it had
com-
majority been in the House. So there was a lot of discussion, and this didn't end up happening until very late at night.
no,
So
you're absolutely correct.
I'm
There
yeah,
was a lot of
it
debate, but the
seems like
debate was
that super
divided.
majority that you're describing wasn't so super until very late at night.
Well, the debate in the Senate was divided completely on partisan lines. So you had, and the Republicans did a nice job. I've actually reached out to a few of them to talk to them afterwards. A very nice job of presenting the issues with this bill. But in terms of when a vote gets called, we knew there was a chance to beat it in the House based off of the vote totals. In the Senate, the Democrats would allow the debate to go on with the Republicans as long as they want to allow it to go on, but they have such a super majority. At any point, they can call the question and call the vote, and the vote's not going to be close there because it's completely divided on partisan lines in the Senate. So the House was the one
Well,
area
except for
where
one.
we
It
had
was one Democrat.
I'm sorry.
Except for one Democrat. There was one.
See, I've learned something here. I wasn't even aware that there was one Democrat who voted against it in the Senate.
I do believe we can bring up
Perhaps there was. Oh, well, so that's one reason why I like doing these shows. Is not just giving information. I learn a lot from them. So I was not aware of that. But I think that some of the, I don't want to say confusion. It's not necessarily confusion, but just an understanding of what passed and what it means. First off, directing OPM to put together a report. I'm not saying this won't happen, by the way, but I'm just giving you a little of the history. There's no reason to believe that that will even get done. OPM has been directed on other pieces of legislation to complete other reports that were considered to be important reports, and they've never finished them, never started them. Last session a year ago, there was a study put together where they were directed to review and do a report on Title IX, which has a lot to do with how towns and cities work if they're not under charters and that sort of thing. That group hasn't even been put together yet, and here we sit a year later. So
okay,
I'm not 100%
so it's
certain.
not a mandate. It's not a mandate, but it says not later than this date. So next year, December. Not a mandate, but it says you have to do it by this date. Sounds pretty mandatey to me. That the Commissioner of Housing and Economic Community and Development, as may be determined by the Secretary, experts, advocates, statewide organizations that represent municipalities, organizations with expertise in affordable housing, fair housing, and planning and zoning, shall establish a methodology for municipalities of fair share pay allocations. And then it goes through, right, you need to determine the number that each needs, how they're going to be allocated across. And so this doesn't, they don't use the language of study in here. It doesn't say that this is just a study. So I don't understand how this is a study, really.
Well, it's the difference is, and I think you can split hairs on it very easily. And I said it's not technically a study, but it functions like a study because it would still take action of the legislature to mandate its implementation. So studies look at things, studies make recommendations, studies suggest that certain things be implemented, but ultimately the General Assembly still has to implement those things. And so I believe firmly that as long as we continue to hold the votes that we have against the implementation, this essentially becomes a report that sits on the shelf. The report's only dangerous if the legislature implements it as a mandate. And whether they did this report or not, I think that's the important thing to remember here. Whether this was done or not, we're going to fight this same battle next year. We'll fight it with a report. We'll fight it without a report. We'll fight the same battle of these advocates trying to create this as a mandate on towns and cities. My job and the job of our advocacy team is to make sure that that mandate never passes. And so every decision that we make along the way, every position that we take, every part of that is a strategy to make sure that we can hold the votes to be certain that the mandate never passes. The rest of it is just paper, essentially, without the mandate.
Okay, so you're saying that this is just government doing bureaucratic things that government does, but what it looks like to me is that if you look at past versions of the bill that didn't make it through, they had allocation numbers in there. And that's one of the reasons it didn't make it through, is because the numbers are outrageous.
Correct.
For like, quote unquote, the richer kind of towns, because it excludes the 7 large cities: Hartford, Waterbury, New London, New Britain, New Haven, Bridgeport. There's one I'm missing. But it excludes them, right? So again, I'm trying to understand how this is different from past legislation. They already have the numbers, and it was the numbers that prevented it from passing. So now they're like, we're going to take the numbers out and do the thing again. It seems like there's a game being played here. Am I wrong in my description of what's happened?
No, it's all a game. So you're not wrong in anything that you said. It's always a game that's being played. I think the game that's played here is more the advocates trying to show the affordable housing folks, trying to show the fair share people, hey, we couldn't get this done, but we're in your corner. We're keeping the conversation going. I think that's what it's more about than anything. Now, from my perspective, and people, there are areas where I can tell you things that I think are absolutely factual, and areas of things that are opinions that people can have different opinions, and that's fine. But from my perspective and my opinion on this, not only does this report not scare me, I think it actually strengthens our case. Because what I believe is it's going to be one more report codified by government, by OPM. So it's kind of like their own report that we're going to be able to get our hands on and point it out there in front of people and say, see, we told you this was not workable. Because now you've done your own report and you've codified what we all already knew, which was this was not something that our towns and cities could do. It's more something that's going to bankrupt many of our communities to even try to do it. And so that the report, if people don't want to call it a study, I'm fine with that.
Well,
I'm
it's not.
absolutely
It's
fine with
the
not calling it a
Democrats
study
that are.
report. But the
The
report
Democrats are trying to
actually,
slow
I
this down.
think, works to our advantage because what it's going to do, it's going to tell us what we already know. And what we
Okay.
already know is that this methodology is not a methodology that's a workable methodology in this state. And so that's the, and so I know some people refer to this as um, fair share phase one. I actually look at it as like fair share phase minus one. I think the advocates took themselves back by doing this because I think it's just going to expose them even more than what they already are.
All right. So, you were talking about like inserting CCM, saying our interests, our things, and it trying to sort of position yourself on the side of the people, it seems. And so I'm trying to figure out what side of this you are on. Because when I look at the language of the bill, it says what this does, and you're even saying yourself, is this basically is creating paperwork. The taxpayers are paying for paperwork, and who we're paying to do that paperwork, and excuse me, my lip is bleeding. I have a cut on it. Is statewide organizations that represent municipalities. Would you say that CCM is one of those?
Yeah, we actually got that language in there.
Okay, so you got this language in there so
We got
that
that language in there. Yes.
so you have a financial incentive for this study to happen then, right? Because you're doing the lobbying to make it happen. You're saying, oh, we're helping you. And then you get to be the one who does the study. So it seems like you're kind of on many sides of this. And it seems like it's more about, it seems like you have some bottom line interest in here rather than actually the interests of the municipalities and the taxpayers.
No, our only interest ever or what the membership tell us to advocate for. We are involved in so many issues from education to taxation to labor issues that I don't need to create work for ourselves. And statewide organizations, that what that means is it gives us the ability to appoint somebody, which would be one of our members. It'd most likely be somebody who's a planning and zoning chair or something like that. When I say we got that language in there, what happened was, in the 11th hour, when the House Democrats came out with this bill and said, okay, we can't get anything that we want, but we're going to do this, we're going to push this study. One member of our advocacy team, a lady by the name of Donna Hamsey, who does a great job. Donna Hamsey immediately went to the House leadership and said, if you're going to run this thing out of here over the next few minutes, at least give us a municipal representative on this study so we have somebody at the table who's reviewing the methodology that's being used. So yeah, so
Okay.
that's why that was
Right,
done.
so
It didn't
so
have
tell
to
me.
be, but I think it actually serves our members better to get them at the table. So even if they're not listened to, they can come back out and report later about the methodology and say, there's flaws in this methodology. We tried to explain that to them. They wouldn't listen to us. It just strengthens
Okay.
our advocacy against this legislation when it comes back around in a year.
And So you guys represent 168 municipalities out of 169 that we have here in Connecticut.
Correct.
Tell me how that works, because you're talking about, for our municipalities, but it seems like they have wildly different interests, right? We have huge, big cities, we have suburbs, we have little rural towns,
Yep.
and fair share, if it goes through, obviously benefits the big towns, the ones that are excluded, because they get all sorts of state funding to build their affordable housing, whereas the taxpayers of many of the other municipalities are going to be directly on the hook for this very expensive unfunded mandate. So how could you possibly claim to represent such disparate interests?
Well, the great thing is they set the agenda. I don't, so that helps. Um, but to give you a little bit of the history since I've been here in the 9 years, as an organization, we are theoretically, and I use that because this has never happened. Theoretically, we could take a position on a majority rules type basis with our membership. So if we had, say, 120 municipal officials in a room and we called to vote, and 61 of them supported it and 59 were against it, we theoretically then could take the position that we're for it because our majority said that we were. We have never done that since I've been here. Almost every single position that is taken by our organization is taken in full unanimity of the membership that are participating. And in the case where there is not unanimity, in many cases, what happens is it just gets pulled from the agenda because the members recognize that their strength in the organization is their strength and unity. And if they start tearing themselves apart on a specific issue, then it only hurts them on other issues. So any issue where we can't come together kind of collectively and advocate for everybody, our members have been very smart about basically just saying, okay, we're not going to take a position on that. We'll let the individual towns and cities take their own positions and do their own advocacy. And it's worked that way since I've been here. I think there's probably been, certainly I could count on one hand, and none of them been particularly contentious, but there's probably only been 3 or 4 times where we have taken a vote, or a vote was called on an advocacy position where 1 or 2 members didn't agree with it. And in that case, what they would typically do is just look around the room, read the room, say, it's a 95-5 type of thing, and I'll just abstain. So but to answer your question, it goes back to that question that I get asked on a regular basis a lot of times. Why did CCM take this position? Why did CCM advocate this way? Where does this come from? And the answer is always the same. It's because we were told to by the membership, because it is a process that is fully driven by the membership to tell us what our advocacy positions are going to be.
All right. So how does it work then when you have, so last year, the president of CCM was the mayor of Hartford,
Luke
which was
Ronan. Yes.
Cronin, right? Luke
Correct.
Cronin's, and then in 2020, Sarah Bronin, Luke Bronin's wife, founded Desegregate CT. And at the opening press conference of this organization, our friend Mr. Rojas was there. And Desegregate CT is a big proponent of fair share housing because of racial justice. So explain to me how that's not a conflict of interest, that the president of CCM has a wife who has an advocacy organization advocating for something that you're claiming CCM is against. You're saying CCM is against fair share housing, and yet your president of last year, wife, is advocating for exactly the opposite alongside Mr. Rojas. Explain that conflict.
Well, first off, let me say this. I think the one thing that's not accurate is Desegregate CT is not a proponent or a supporter of fair share. They look at fair share as actually a competitor to what their proposals are. So Those two organizations, the what's Fair Share falls under, I think they're called the Alliance for Community Development. I forget what the Alliance's
All right.
real name
Well,
is.
nonetheless, Mr. Rojas is somebody who they claim has advocated for the position. They have posts up on Facebook saying this is what Rojas says, and we like this. Rojas was at their opening press conference.
Sure.
So they have interests, and that organization is again not as advocating for things that seem to be directly against what you're saying the interests of CCM are, and your president last year was his wife.
Well,
So
it's again,
how
it's
do
not
you
driven by one person. It's not driven by one person. It's not driven by the president. The president has the ability, which Mayor Bronin did on occasion, has the ability to set agenda items for discussion. Not to control the agenda, but they can put something on the agenda. There was a point where Mayor Bronin wanted CCM to hear presentations from and to engage with Desegregate CT. And so as his right as president and under the way that the membership works, there was a working group put together to work with Desegregate CT. That working group had representatives on it, I think, from your part of the state, from Greenwich. Our first vice president, where Mayor Bronin was the president, the first vice president who was in line to be president was Jamie Stevenson, the former first select woman of Darien. So Jamie Stevenson, a lady from Greenwich who was with the Housing Authority. There was a gentleman who was with the Council of Government down that way, not Westcog, which has done incredible work, by the way. I should stop and give great kudos to Francis Pickering and the folks at Westcog for the research and that they've done on this issue. But the other cog, he actually works for the city of Stratford and works for the cog. He was involved. And then we had some members, all around from all corners of the state that met on a fairly regular basis with Desegregate CT. Ultimately, what came out of that back then, it was a mixed bag. There were some proposals that Desegregate CT was proposing or supporting that our working group of the membership were behind and said they could support too. And then there were a series of proposals that we weren't behind. The ones that we were, as I recall, and I could mess some of this up because it doesn't seem like it's been that long ago, but stuff happens so fast and changes. But I know generally the issue of accessory dwelling units, they call them ADUs, and the idea of people having a right to have an ADU on their property was something that working group of our membership generally supported, under the guise that you only had a right to have an ADU if the primary property owner was living at the facility. Because what they didn't want to have was accessory dwelling units that were basically like two apartments that were being rented to college kids
okay.
or something like that.
I guess my concern mostly is just it seems that there is at least the suspicion of corruption when you have the mayor of a city who is the president of this organization, and then his wife is the founder of this other organization, and they're all working together. And that seems, again, the relationships there are just very questionable. And again, I still have to go back to CCM. You guys have a $20 million budget, right? And so how do you guys make your money?
Well, the majority of our money is made, our greatest founding, it comes from our property casualty and workers' compensation liability risk insurance pool, our risk program called KERMA. The majority of cities and towns in the state, local public agencies, boards of education, 90+% of our communities get their insurance through the KERMA program. And so there's certainly revenue that's generated from that supports.
So if an official gets sued, they have an insurance policy through you.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's by far our largest service program. I have 128 staff about 90 of those 128 work exclusively for the insurance pool. So that's a lion's share of what we do that builds into that $20 million budget. We also have a lot of other programs that we offer, not quite of that level. We have an energy program. Many of our towns and cities purchase their energy through the league because we can pool energy providers to whereas small communities, their energy rates would be much higher, but doing it through our energy program, they get a much cheaper energy rates. And so, there's revenue that's generated from there. We have a drug and alcohol program where when cities and towns hire new employees and they have to have them tested, it's much less expensive for them collectively to go through our drug and alcohol program and have that done. So the majority of our revenues come from the programmatic side of things. We also draw, from that over the years, we have built up a certain amount of reserves. And from those reserves, we actually draw income off of those reserves and use them to support the operating budget as well. And
Okay.
and then
So like
the last piece of that obviously is our dues, but our dues are actually very nominal to our towns and cities. We try to do, I don't do it every year because I don't have time, but we try to do a return on investment type of document to our towns and cities so they can look at the money they receive based off of our advocacy, whether it's at the state level or federal level, the money they've saved based off of some really bad ideas that we've killed versus the investment that they make into the pool, into the league. So that's a big part of it as well. It's the ROI. Every city and town has to look at it and determine, what is the return on investment I'm getting from being part of this organization. And most of them collectively, when they look at the numbers, are pretty pleased. That's why they stay with us.
Okay, so you guys have your hands in a lot of different areas, and it's fair to say that CCM benefits, you're able to grow, your company grows as government grows. True or false?
To a degree, I guess you could say that. We're not a growth. We're not a growth organization. We're not a for-profit entity. So
Would you
growth
like
is
to
not
see growth?
something that
You
we're
like
looking
to see
for.
growth of municipalities. That is a goal of yours.
To see
Growth.
growth of
Yeah.
municipalities? No, that's not a
So
goal of ours.
in your 2021 annual report, you guys say, we are here to help usher in a new era for Connecticut municipal growth.
Yeah, well,
So can you
you have to
explain
understand
why
that.
you just said that you're not for municipal growth, not for the growing of government, but
No, it's not.
that
It's not
is
a
what it
matter of
is?
growing of government. It's a matter of giving communities the tools and the resources and the support that they need to grow and develop their communities as they deem appropriate. We're not guiding that growth. We're here to say, and I tell a lot of our members this as well when we first meet, and particularly when newly electeds come in. Look at our organization as a resource to you to help you do the things you want to do that you don't have the staff in house to do, whatever that may be. Sometimes somebody will come in and they'll say, we want to communicate better with the community, but we don't have a public relations person on staff. They'll reach to us and we'll try to help them with services of doing their public relations for them, turning over press releases, turning over things like that. We are an extension of the communities to be a resource to them within the areas that they determine that they need. It's not a top-down thing. We don't tell communities what to do. We respond to what they ask us to do for them. The other thing that we do that we haven't talked
Sure,
about.
but that still doesn't, it's a fact that as they ask you to do more, like if there's going to be more revenue out there to pay you to do more for them, you're going to make more money. You can hire people, you can make more money, you can probably make more money. How much money do you make? What's your salary? You guys, $20 million, like you probably have a pretty nice salary, right?
I have a very good salary. I am very blessed. I was recruited from out of state to be brought here. I was brought in at a salary in the mid six figures, and I have received performance-based bonuses since then. What I tell everybody, for me, my salary is not a secret. But if people want to know exactly what that is, I would direct them to our executive committee and my board of directors because they're the ones that determine based off of that information what they want to put out.
Right. And it's fair to say they care about making money, right? that at the end of the day, they want to make money, they want to grow, and so as governments grow, CCM grows. So you might not be telling them specifically what to do, but you certainly benefit. You benefit from having to do studies that you say are just going to sit on the shelves. Like, so it's hard not to see that as a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I don't see it that way, Stephanie, and I don't agree. And I'll tell you why. Because in my role, most of what we do, not all of it, because we are involved in so many things. But if you really had to boil this organization down into what its one primary function, its one primary purpose is, our overall goal that we measure success or failure against is our ability to control the property tax and increases to the property tax and mandates and different things that create additional pressure on the property tax. We generally, when it's all said and done, our fundamental underlying goal is to try to protect property taxpayers from higher taxes than what they're already paying.
Okay.
That is what we're involved in more than anything else. On this housing deal, that's why we have significantly severe issues with it, because you're talking about building affordable housing on the backs of the property tax. I don't know how you put $20 billion worth of expenses into property taxes and say you're going to make housing more affordable. I think
Well, I'm
that's
certainly
bizarre.
glad to see that you agree on that math. So tell me more about then the housing crisis, because it seems like you kind of accept this premise that there's a housing crisis. Can you tell me what is the housing crisis? Where is this information coming from? Where do those numbers come from?
Well, I think there's an affordable housing shortage collectively, but by the way, let's make sure that we understand this. Everybody will talk about this in the context of Connecticut, this great affordable housing shortage in Connecticut. There is a national housing shortage, and the movement to override zoning and these movements to create these affordable housing initiatives, this is going on all over the country. This is not unique to Connecticut. The people here in Connecticut will have you believe that we are this tremendous outlier that are doing all of these horrible things, and we have this massive problem here. Now, we have opportunities to do better, but we have the same opportunities and the same challenges that they have in Illinois, that they have in Nebraska, that they have everywhere. This is good. These leagues. There's 49 municipal leagues. The state of Hawaii does not have one. They don't have any really local government. There's 49 municipal leagues. So I get together with my colleagues from 48 other states on a fairly regular basis. Every single one of them are dealing with this issue right now the same as we are in
Where
Connecticut.
can I find these numbers though? Because like here, housing crisis, but where are the numbers? Like, where's the data coming from? Who provides this data for people to make this claim?
Oh, I think it comes from a lot of different places. I can't tell you specifically. I haven't, I spend so much time trying to cut through the nonsense that and that's part of the problem. If we were actually sitting down around a table and having a collective discussion that brought in local voices to figure out, where there's opportunities and where there's challenges, and all to come together and agree on a common goal and how to address it, I think we could actually get somewhere on some
Oh,
of these
come
things.
on,
But
that sounds nice,
right
Joe.
now
We
it's not
know that
working that
sounds
way.
nice. That sounds nice, right? But that's like not at all a realistic
I
way.
disagree. I can give you two examples in the last year where we've done that very thing, where it hasn't worked that way before.
Okay,
So
so
it
what? Like
can be
what?
done, but the proponents have to be willing to do it. But
So
it can be done.
okay, I guess so you're saying there is a housing crisis. You accept that there's a housing crisis, not just in Connecticut, and I certainly wasn't trying to frame it as so. I
Yeah.
do believe that there's a like people say there's a housing crisis, right? But
I
I'm
think
not
there's
so
a
sure on those numbers. Like I don't they don't ever give any evidence for those things. And then of course they say that the solution is we need more policy, we need more government, we need more intervention. And I just want to know, does is that CCM's um view? Do you believe that more government, more policy, more intervention is going to solve the housing crisis, or do you
no.
believe that there's actually a relationship between the so-called housing crisis and expanded government bureaucracy?
I believe there's a relationship between the affordability crisis and Connecticut's over reliance on property taxes.
Wait, okay, so tell
That's what
me
I
there's
believe.
an affordability. Okay, so tell me about the affordability crisis because, yeah, I'm trying to. That's not the numbers I've seen.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by the
No,
numbers you see?
tell me what affordability crisis is
No,
Connecticut in
my
terms of
point
housing?
anecdotally is this. If I think most of these provisions that have been brought forward have been brought forward under the guise of affordable housing, but they have nothing to do with affordability. They have to do with housing stock. They have to do with helping developers build more. And when I'm talking about affordability, the point that I've tried to make from the very beginning with a lot of different groups is you can't have an affordability conversation in Connecticut and not talk about the property tax, because the reality is if you build a house and you put somebody in that house at a very low rate, a very low mortgage,
Right.
once you build in the escrow of the over reliance of the property tax, what would have been affordable to them now very quickly becomes unaffordable because they can't pay the tax bill on it. And we don't talk about that enough. And that to me, if we really have a house, I'm not saying that we don't need more housing stock. We probably do have some limitations on housing stock. But when you propose bills that the way that you're going to make housing more affordable is by suing the property taxpayer. Now think about that. They talk about suing municipalities. You don't sue a municipality. A municipality is an entity. You sue where the money is. You're suing the property taxpayer. So
Right.
if you're
Essentially.
talking about affordability and you come in and you sue a municipality and you force them to defend that lawsuit, or if they win that lawsuit and you force them to develop or to do something because the private market wouldn't do it, that's part of the problem with fair share that people don't understand. This isn't about, we make it all about zoning and zoning puts up a wall. Okay, well, what happens when a private developer won't develop? You say, here's a piece of land, here's a tract of land, go for it. Let's meet our fair share. And the developer says, yeah, I'm not interested in that, walks away. Now you give a nonprofit entity the ability to sue the municipality and force the municipality to do the construction that the private market would not do. And you think that's going to make things more affordable when all that cost has been borne by the property taxpayer?
Right. Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly we're in agreement about that. It just seems like there's a lot of things that go on up in Hartford, and I'm certainly still a little bit hesitant when it comes to organizations like CCM and their role in government. It just seems like it's one big party and we're not in it. Right? You guys are all friends. You have these relationships where one person can be the president of CCM and his wife can be the president of or the founder of an organization with differing interests. And he can also be the mayor of a town. And that's my question too. When it comes to the votes, you said that all of our does every single municipality have the same amount of votes? Like, how do you actually balance the interests, right? Because the at the federal level, and it works similarly in the states, is they have the three different branches, and then they have the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the small states get to have the same in this one, and then they have representative over there.
Yep.
So how do you guys ensure that out of 168 municipalities in CCM, you truly are representing them? Because it doesn't seem like a one-to-one vote would necessarily do that.
Well, we are by structure, we are a one town, one vote default structure with a provision in our bylaws that someone could call for a weighted vote that would then give more votes to a community by population. In 9 years that I've been here, the weighted vote provision has never been used. I think it's like, the legislature, they have that thing that call the question. You cut off debate and call the question. They call it a nuclear option. It's there, but nobody uses it. That's how I think that our members look at the weighted vote thing. It's there. It's never used. We're pretty much a one town, one vote on all issues. So, so Union, the little town of Union, when they come to our meeting and they cast a vote, their vote is the same as the city of Bridgeport. That's how it works.
Okay. Good to know. And then you had said before this, you got pulled by a recruiter to come out here to Connecticut. And so before this, you were running prisons essentially.
I ran
So
a
what,
consolidated prison and jail system in West Virginia.
right?
Yes.
So how does housing inmates give you the experience to come out here and develop housing policy and for free people?
Nothing gives you the full depth and breadth of experience that you need to do this job, because we are involved again in everything, and in everything at every moment. Where people were focused, when people were very focused on the housing debate that was taking place on the floor of the Senate, we were over on the floor of the House getting a bill pulled and called to pass that changed the way the Pequot Mohegan tribal funds were distributed, a bill that gets an extra $90 million in 2026 to our municipalities. So, those types of different things that you're doing back and forth and trying to weigh all that. And listen, if there are people, and I'm sure there are, and you've articulated it some, that say, well, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical because you're involved in all these things. And I get that. And the balance that we have to strike sometimes, to the average person, they may not always appreciate. But our job at the end, when it's all said and done, is to understand the playing field. We don't set the playing field. We don't always like the playing field, but is to understand the playing field and then to work within that playing field as best we can to get the best outcomes for the
Right.
cities and towns of Connecticut.
All right, so I'm going to ask again, maybe I'll slightly rephrase it, right? What was a recruiter thinking when they're like, oh, we need somebody to work on policy, housing, all of these things that oversee free people in the state of Connecticut? We're going to go and we're going to poach this guy that was running prisons. Like, why would they want somebody who was running prisons and jails?
Sure.
How would they think that that would be a good fit for this role at CCM?
Well, I was a former, I think it was my whole background, my whole resume. I was a former state house majority leader. I was actually the youngest majority leader in the history of West Virginia. So I had that on the resume, that I knew the inner workings of how to work in a general assembly, how to work through issues in the general assembly. So I think they probably like that. And then I went and worked in the private sector, and I grew during the recession when other places were closing down. I grew a small business. I grew its revenues, opened up 2 or 3 different locations in places where everybody else was closing, got recognized in a national magazine for being #1 in the country for growth, that sort of thing. So I had that private sector business experience that I think they liked, so it wasn't all government. It wasn't a whole life in government. And then when I went back to West Virginia, it really wasn't with the intent, frankly, of running jails and prisons. Joe Manchin, who is a United States Senator now, many people know the name Joe Manchin. He was governor then. And he had, talked to me about coming back and joining his administration. And I was going to be doing some different roles. And when I accepted the position to come back, the former U.S. Senator for West Virginia, Robert Byrd, died. And when he died, it became very clear the person I was coming back to work for, and Joe Manchin, was going to be leaving and going to Washington, D.C. And some of the things that he was going to have me involved in, he wasn't going to be there anymore to see through. And at that time, the Regional Jail and Correctional Facility Authority had multiple audit deficiencies that had gone back for years. It was a mess. Their audits were a mess year after year after year. And he sent me over there, essentially not to run the inner workings of the jails and prisons. He sent me over there to clean up the central office and fix the audit deficiencies and get the authority back on solid ground, which within a year we had a clean, unqualified audit. We had done all those things. We were very successful. So I think it was that combination of things that those recruiters are paid to go out and find people who have diverse skill sets and to do these roles because you're involved in so many different things. And it's funny, Stephanie, I will tell you, I've shared this story with others. When the recruiter called me and asked me if I was looking, I told him I wasn't looking, but I was always willing to listen. And he said, well, I want to talk to you about a job in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I want to talk to you about a job in New Haven, Connecticut. My immediate response to him without hesitation was, you can tell me about the one in Raleigh. I'm not going to Connecticut. There's nothing against Connecticut. I just knew nothing about it. I was more interested in heading south. It wasn't something that I had ever given any thought to. And he convinced me to come up and interview with the board and talk to them and see if I would have interest. And it was really the challenges here, but the unique opportunities, the talent in some of these local governments. I was really surprised. I've come from parts of the country where local government doesn't have the cream of the crop in terms of the talent that it's drawing. I was being interviewed by a board of directors of some very impressive, very talented people who I could tell cared deeply about their communities. And by the time I left the interview, I had gone from somebody who didn't know if I had any interest at all to being someone who I really hope they considered for the job, because I thought that a lot of good work could be done here.
Well, I wish I had the same faith in our leadership here in Connecticut as you seem to express. We do actually have a question that just came through the chat before we get out of here. I want to give this a chance. So Maria Weingarten, you know her, she's founder of CT169.
Yes.
And so she has a question about like the fair share, kind of going back to what I asked, is like, we already know the numbers. We know they know the numbers, right? So Open Community Alliance, they already calculated the shares for every municipality. The bill language that passed states the same 4 criteria on wealth. Do you expect the numbers to change by OPM?
I don't know. And here's why I say that. I think, should they? No, they shouldn't. Because if they're being fair and honest, we already know what the numbers are. This should be nothing more than a validator of what the numbers are, and the numbers are terrible. The flip side of that, and I've talked to our staff about this, let's say in theory, not saying this will happen, but let's say in theory, to try to make it look like fair share is not so bad. Let's say there is something nefarious going on here, which there could be, honestly, in government. These things happen. But let's say something nefarious goes on in here, and they come back and they give this report, and they put this report out that says, well, if you do fair share, it won't be so bad. The numbers will only be this, this, and this. And those are numbers that don't look bad to people, and they don't look bad to our communities. At that point, what we would do, under the blessing of our communities, because we would never do it on our own, but at that point, what I would suggest that our communities take a look at is saying, okay, if these are the numbers you're talking about, and if we really don't have a problem with them, then maybe we go back and consider codifying it, but only codifying it under the parameters of that report, if that report is truly that good. I don't think that'll happen. I think you're going to get a report that's just going to continue to validate what we've said all along, which is that this is not a sustainable solution.
All right. Well, I certainly hope that you're right. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to come on here, have this conversation, try to bring some light to this process, especially with those last 12 hours, 13 hours or so being so crazy, going from being like, okay, fair share is killed, awesome, to, all of a sudden it's in there. People were saying CCM stood down. People were saying that there was all sorts of deals going on, which you seem to be like, oh, that could happen in government, but we kind of know that's pretty status quo in government. So I wouldn't be so passe about that. But certainly I hope that we can keep the lines of communication open. I asked tough questions. I hope that that you didn't seem to back down. I'm certainly not trying to be like combative, just trying to really get at the
I think it's great. It's great what you do. And I know you're trying to wrap up, but if we have just a minute,
yeah, go ahead.
I want to offer something that you may be surprised to hear me say, but the one thing that people know me find out is I really am very transparent and wear things on my sleeve. And, some people are like, why do you let them know that? Well, it's the truth and they should know it. We didn't stand down. Okay. We did not stand down. We made sure that members on both sides of the aisle were still aware that we did not like this bill moving forward, and we didn't agree with anything that had to do with fair share. But with that being said, And this is the part that I put it out there. You're going to have listeners that aren't going to like to hear it, but it's the job that we do, and it's the decisions that I make. Again, they're 8 votes short of passing the fair share mandate in the House. If those 8 votes swing, we're done. If we hold those 8 votes, they can't. Now there's 30 votes. It's 30 Democrats, but if they pull 8 votes out of 30 Democrats,
right,
this bill can pass. My belief, and having done this for years and understand, and it's a part of politics that people hate. But when the bill passed to put stuff in a report, I could have scorched the earth on those 30 or so representatives who are against fair share but went ahead and voted for that bill. I could call them out. I could go after them. I could do the shame on you. I could do a whole process with them. But the reality is, next session, I need to hold those 30 votes. And if I turn those people who are our friends on the mandate portion of this into our enemies because I scorched the earth on them too much over a vote that I don't think really does anything anyway, I worry about them flipping. I really do. I worry that you take somebody and you say, you voted for fair share, you voted for fair share, you voted for fair share, to the point where they say, okay, if I voted for fair share and that's how I'm going to be branded and that's how I'm going to be labeled, then I might as well just vote for all of it. I from an advocacy person who has to work in that building and has to work votes and control votes, I don't like the bill that passed, but I'm not going to burn in effigy the people who were voting against the mandate but switched over and voted on that, because I need them to hold their position next year to continue to vote against the mandate.
All right. Well, I certainly hope they do, and that it's not a sign that they are slowly down the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Alexis Harrison wants to let you know that she thinks it was a good interview, appreciates your answers. Likewise here as well. And I don't have the same I guess I'm not involved in the process the same way. So I'm certainly going to be holding those people to account. I'm certainly going to be asking them to articulate how they see the difference between what's in this bill and the mandate, and how one doesn't just, again, that slippery slope lead to the other that we've seen happen too often in government, where they just slowly inch by inch by inch. And then we end up where we are in the state of Connecticut here
Sure.
today, with some of the highest housing prices, some of the biggest tax burdens. I'm a young mom, and my cost of living has gone up. I'm a homeowner, so I'm certainly dealing with all of these things, as I know everybody else is. Thank you again so much, Joe, for coming, offering your answers. I hope that at some point in the future we can do this again.
Would love
and,
to.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate all your hard work.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for having me on it, and thanks for doing this show. I think these conversations that allow people to engage with the community and hear things and get answers to their questions are always valuable. So I appreciate your insights as well.
Yeah. And if there's, if you ever want to come back on, you can initiate. If you have somebody you want to send to me, idea for something, let me know.
You got it. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you, everybody out there who tuned in. Make sure that you've done all that YouTube stuff. Like, share, subscribe. And I want to know in the comments, how did you think this interview went? Are there any additional questions you would like to see answered? Is there somebody else who you would like to see in an interview? Until next time, you know what we do. We think free so we can live free.